Welcome back to another episode of Building Up Your Business, the podcast. I'm excited to be back. My name is Erica Dill. I am your host with Operationally Up. We are here to deal with your operations and supply chain challenges. Remember, from bombs to order fulfillment, marketing to taxes, learn the stuff from the pros before you step in it. And our pro today is Tom Hanson. I'm so thrilled to have him. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Erica.
Awesome. With over 30 years of experience forming and leading global market development strategies, and as a former U.S. commercial diplomat, he now forms and guides international business partnerships for manufacturers and developers of technologies and professional services. And that makes him the perfect guest for our topic today: why you are not too small to sell internationally, which we are a global market. There's such a wide range of things, and even with the current economic climate going on and some of that changing as far as where you may be able to get things from or sell to, it's never going to not be a global market. So we are excited to be talking about that today. So let's kick it off strong. So American business owners should always keep in mind um, that they can sell globally. And when their mind goes to selling globally, they look at how big the US is and how many people they can sell to in the US. But then if you think about all the other countries out there, there's not just countries that we can import from, there are people we can export to. So share some information with us, Tom, about what that potential actually looks like.
Absolutely, Erica. Thanks so much. Let's all keep in mind that the United States as a destination market is so desirable around the world, and our country's products and services, by the same token, are in consistently high demand around the world, everywhere. We have a very transparent form of government compared to so many other nations. Companies and governments do their best effort to adhere to ethical guidelines. We have an amazing transportation system and infrastructure, a lot of very well educated and motivated workers. We just, I feel like when I talk to companies, I realize the United States economy, and it's based upon small businesses, is really built on an unbridled innovation. It's this pioneering entrepreneurial spirit that continues to build our economy. Wave after wave of very fearless and brave immigrants have come over with great ideas and great energy to study, to research, to open businesses. And also, we got to keep in mind that the United States is home to most of the venture capital sources in the world, a very, very competitive commercial banking system. So what's all that mean? It means, open and productive competition. And then that comes back to your comment about how American companies should view overseas markets, for sure.
And one of the things that I think is really funny, and as you said it, I was like, oh, duh. You know, how many times do we sit here and we complain about, especially during COVID, oh, the logistics and transportation here is horrendous, and oh, everybody's lazy, or all of these different things. But when you look at the global market, we're still at the top of our game, and we do have so vast resources here. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because I think we do need to keep that in perspective from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, look, energy alone, we've got such a strong position in the world for energy autonomy. As you mentioned earlier, I mentioned the transportation systems, the productivity of American workers, they're well paid, and the margin. Sometimes countries don't succeed in competing with manufacturing because the let's say the productivity margin of their workers is so low. So they can't compete because the prices don't follow with them. So it's really important to keep in mind the institutional underpinnings that have allowed so many small businesses to thrive in every state and every territory, for sure.
Well, and that kind of leads me into where we're going with our second question. Um, because as I'm thinking about, and I kind of mentioned, we import a lot of products that are made in other countries. And so even though products may not be made in other countries, just the fact that they were designed, American brands, conceived here, and even they may be produced in another country, imported or shipped directly to another country, just the fact that they were designed, developed, innovated, thought of here in the US holds a significant amount of weight. Tell us more about that.
Oh, I love this subject. You just hit on one of my favorite subjects of international, my mantra, and that has to do, and you can relate to this in the line of work that you do, brand cachet. What does it mean for a company to have brand cachet? It's everything from, your consumer identity to how your partners perceive you. And here's the one thing that companies in this beautiful state of California have going for them, and that brand cachet made in California. You can see it
Mm.
in everything the country perceives. And of course, as you say, it's conceived and designed in California and made anywhere else in the world. But it comes, it's everything from board shorts to the mini series that we're all binging on, to silicone wafers, to flavored water, you name it. So every business can rely upon that to catch the attention, and along with that just becomes, it's back to that pioneering spirit. There's something that you can attribute to California made goods and services because of this image that the world has, in the fact that the bravest and gutsiest and smartest people made their way all the way west when our country was being formed. And so that is really important to keep in mind. And as far as a consumer base, the state of California is, I think, the fifth largest economy in the world. So you have a complete set of ready customers, ready consumers, and all the natural resources and supply chains that the Californian companies need to make it. So that brand cachet, you can take that to the bank for sure, for sure.
Well, and I love that you even mentioned TV and miniseries because, there are, Bollywood obviously has a huge following, and there are, Telemundo in Mexico, and there are other countries that create, TV and radio and video and movies. But really, Hollywood in California and the United States really leads in that market, and those movies are translated into tons of other languages for consumption outside the US. And there are so many other cultures that look to the US for different trends, and they're obsessed with the US culture. And Japan is a big one that's very interested in what the US market is doing, and so they are looking to us. And I love that made in California, because we know a lot of very high-end brands that talk about being designed in LA or designed in California, and that makes such a huge impact.
Oh, it does. And think about, back on the subject of miniseries and movies and TV, think about the success of Apple and Netflix in the world right now. Not only have they conceived their original line of creative programming in California, but now they're so vast in the world that they're spurring creation of creative content in dozens of countries around the world. So it's the spin-off on a huge scale where you start to see some truly excellent programming. I hope you've had a chance to see some of the series that are coming out of European countries and South American countries. So it's a continuation of this allure that started like 100 years ago in Hollywood. So it's a great example of what we're talking about.
And I think that's, one of those things, and I know I'm breaking tangent of our talk points, but I love that's the thing I love about doing podcasts is we can go down any rabbit hole we want to go down. But
Yeah.
one of the things that I love about product development and being able to sell products is, the things that we create here can really take an impact and spur global innovation. And we don't have to just rely on people creating products here, and conceiving these ideas and really. you've now come into a world where we can design here, produce in China, ship directly to Europe, and that global supply chain really comes to work, and it actually makes it more accessible for smaller companies. You don't have to worry about bringing large containers into the US and then repackaging and shipping. You can drop pallets directly from China or any other country into another country, and it makes duties and taxes and tariffs and logistics costs and everything so much more simple.
Oh, I know. And your line of work, I know you deal with this all the time, Erica, and that's product development. And we've discussed how it's a checklist-driven venture. You have to be so detail-oriented, and that's not limited to just large companies. But a startup, this will make or break their success. And we know in the world of startups, maybe you have worked in the kinds of startups I have, but the common theme is they don't have two dimes to rub together. They don't have an extra 10 minutes to spare before the bank says, sorry, you tried, but we're closing. So there's a bootstrapping mentality. Again, back to that pioneering spirit. I'm sure some of your listeners can relate to that. But this just points to the need that small companies can avail themselves of a global supply chain at whatever scale they need, container scale not mentioned, necessary as you mentioned, and really, you just need to make sure that you're calling in the right experts. Somebody who can advise you, could advise your C-level, or go on staff at your company and be the expert for product management, be the expert for strategic channel partnerships around the world. And it just comes back to that idea of it being a checklist-driven venture. It's almost like a matrix. So you've got to acknowledge the fact that you're in this make or break process as a small company. You just have to take a deep breath and dive in. And we can talk a little bit more about, what the notion of a checklist is in the minds of product managers, for sure.
Well, and I think that's a really good point because, especially bringing in professionals who've done this before, because they don't, startups don't have a lot of money. And when you are developing a product and you're thinking about potentially going global, there's a lot of different challenges that you could encounter later down the line if you're not proactive in thinking about those types of things. So, for example, when we're talking about having a product produced in another country and shipping directly to a third country, if, for example, you're not rated in the electrical requirements or have the correct plug configuration, like if you haven't thought about that ahead of time, you're going to run into some challenges. So, thinking ahead and planning ahead is so important. And if you haven't been down that path before, like, getting help, calling in a friend, having a board of advisors who's done it before, having going to good networking events and having somebody that you can call. Spoiler alert, that's how Tom and I met. Those are key things of having those resources so that you can plan ahead in that design process.
Oh, I know it. And listen, as I'm sure your listeners can relate, and you too, Erica, you've got to get the leadership and the investors totally on board when you start to discuss the notion of going overseas for your product, because it affects the organization of a small company. You have to hire certain kinds of people to satisfy international relationships, or you bring in advisors. And you've just got to look at it's daunting to look at the world and think, well, who needs my product in country X or continent Y? And once you narrow in on markets based upon your preferred geographic regions or the presence or the absence of people who you think can represent you, and you look at competition that might originate in those target countries, all of a sudden the world gets a whole lot smaller, and that helps kind of small companies rather take a breath. But you mentioned something as mundane as a plug, or it could be
Mhm.
packaging. You know what?
Yeah.
If you're going to sell in the European Union, you better study those packaging requirements for recyclable content and the unit costs that it'll take to get your beautifully designed retail package from your fulfillment company, perhaps in Orange County, for instance, to Belgium. So there's so many things to take a look at, and then not to mention things like compensation for your channel relationships.
Well, and I think, I was gonna I was trying to think if I was gonna pile on this, but I think I am gonna pile a little bit more onto what we're talking about. Language requirements. If you sell in Canada, you have to have English and French on your label, and it has to be the exact same size. So if you want to talk about really messing up your brand aesthetic and your design, like that's a lot of information to put in the exact same size, which is not the requirement when you're dealing with Spanish.
No.
So, I mean, and I'm sure, Tom, you know way more about all the different requirements than I do.
Oh, it's funny to think about that. You just prompted a very unpleasant memory for me. And that was
Oh,
how,
no.
how are I was counseling a harvester of gourmet sea salts from Hawaii.
Oh,
And so
geez.
we won shelf space at gourmet retailers, natural foods retailers. So yay, we've got the shelf space. Yay, we've got the brokers and the agents. Well, guess what? On the label that your retailer places on the shelf that has your product on it, there are so many things that have to be physically present and visible to the shopper as they walk by. You have to see certain things. So you may have a 360 label on your jar of salt, or you name it, but you've got to make sure that certain things show up. And then you get into the European Union where you might have these
Yeah.
amazing, like 7 language user guides or something like that. So
Yes.
you've,
You have to make little
you've got
booklets.
little booklets. You've got to just be you got to get really visual with your instructions. I'm sure that, the world of IKEA is helping us all become better visual thinkers because they try to avoid all the words they can when they're telling you how to assemble your bedpost. But yeah, there's things like that a product manager at a small company you have to swing way above your weight as far as advising your investors and those brilliant engineers who conceived the product and handed it over to you and said, make this sell. You got to know a lot about things like that. I've been there.
Yeah, it sounds like it for sure. And the reason why I was hesitant to pile on is because the whole topic here is you're not too small to sell internationally. And Tom and I really want to stress you are not too small to sell internationally. The importance is making sure you have the right resources to know how to sell internationally. And do it the right way so that you can make it as easy and simple as possible. And my next question is probably the most exciting piece of today, and we could have not talked about everything else because I'm just so excited to get to this. But Tom, you specialize in sharing resources for small businesses because there are programs that help people sell internationally. Please tell us
Oh
more.
yeah. Oh yes, saving money is a brilliant notion for startups and everybody. But listen, here in the US and in whatever destination countries that you have, there is a bounty of public funds, and they originate from government agencies. And the sole purpose of those public funds is to make sure that your company's brilliant product or brilliant service makes its way to the international channel partners that you have and to the end users in those destination countries. So let's take, for instance, the United States Small Business Administration. It's a part of the federal government, as you can imagine, and they disperse funds from the federal government to all of the states and territories, who in turn, through government state offices or networks of business development centers, what have you, disperse those funds. And the purpose of those funds is to make sure that a new to export company or a new to another market export company can subsidize what they might be spending on practical things like a localized website or travel to take part in a trade show in another nation or product documentation that we talked about earlier. So there's something that you can find no matter where you are in the nation. You can find what's called a STEP grant, STEP, just like the word. And your points of contact for these federal tax dollars are through state agencies. And I can tip you anybody off who needs to learn more about that. But I'll tell you, Erica, that is only one example. That's only the US government. It's not the destination government of the country where you might be wanting to go. But when I was a diplomat selling US goods and services overseas, I saw firsthand how small companies were able to stand up alongside some heavy hitters at these international trade events or present their products in a way that made it look like they were completely ready for the market. So you get that attention of the decision makers, and it makes all the difference. So never hesitate to put your tax dollars to work.
So then you're also, if I understand correctly, you're also saying that other countries have programs that companies can take advantage of so that they can get resources to sell products into them as well?
Indeed. Here's the beautiful thing. It's like a revolving door when you think about it. It's like a revolving door of governments who want to make sure that you're going to succeed. So just take an example. Here in the United States, we have, of course, our own Commerce Department has offices in every city that help local companies figure out how to export and how to find these funds and find these partners overseas. But because of the size of the US and the impact of our economy and the population and the diversity, we we host foreign nations who have the same kind of people working in the main cities whose job it is to find American exports of any size who they think will work really well in their countries, say New Zealand, for example. So you might find that a New Zealand trade commissioner for the federal government of New Zealand might want to take a look at your company and your product. And they in turn then say, hey, guess what? We're so motivated to make sure that California or American companies sell in New Zealand. We have these funds, and these funds help defray. And it can be anything from a gigantic sovereign wealth fund that a nation might administer through the executive branch down to these local state level funds that will help defer. So never hesitate to look into what public resources there are because it's competitive out there after all. Countries want to do the best against each other, and so they'll put whatever funds they can to use. And by the
Well,
way,
and that's,
these
oh, go ahead,
these just one more thought, Erica. These
please.
public funds I'm mentioning, they tend to withstand the political winds of administration changes.
Mm.
I talked about the SBA earlier, the Small Business Administration. I worked overseas during three different presidential administrations, and it never really flagged as far as the availability and the funding for these small business support groups. And so even though we see a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about, the outcome of administration strategies and agency strategies, you just didn't see that. You saw, a continual pledge to support small businesses. So I wouldn't worry terribly too much about that.
And I know that's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and especially if you're a small business owner. There's a lot going on, and times do seem uncertain, especially when we're talking about consumer goods that may be produced in other countries. There is a lot of fear and hesitancy right now, but I think that it's good that you pointed out that, programs like the SBA have weathered, a lot of different climates and that the resources have been there. But, the one thing that won't change is that other countries do want US products. And even though there might be some tension between the US and other countries, there was always going to be that need for the US products because of where we stand. And, I'm sure that that will continue. So thank you for that point. One of the other things that you had mentioned is that large cities have departments of commerce and that companies can go and talk to and get information from. Is it just as simple as looking them up and making a phone call or taking a visit?
Yeah, here's the beautiful thing. Speaking of the bounty of public funds, where you can start is the website trade.gov. Trade.gov introduces not only American companies to export potential, but it also informs foreign companies about how to find markets here. And that trade.gov online resource has connections for a company to find the very nearest export assistance center. And I think there are about 120 of them. So that's pretty much any good sized city around our nation. Then you get into state level resources. And the state of California, because of its size and impact globally, has a really strong business development office that's run through the governor's office in Sacramento. Then you get back to those county and city resources. Los Angeles County is a prime example of a world-sized entity that can support LA County exporters, and they in turn offer grants. So you can find somebody who can connect you to the very basics of how to export. And then when you're ready, you go up a step and you talk to somebody who can say, here's how you meet retailers in countries X, Y, and Z. So no shortage of information online. State of California, trade.gov for the federal government. And then if you really want to get adventurous and look afield, you can start to say to yourself, well, which of these three countries might be interesting to us? And if so, what are their resources? And voila, you start to see a plethora of resources.
That's awesome, and therefore it makes it very accessible for small companies to start exporting their products to other countries. And the only other thing that I can think of that we didn't touch on is that I do want to bring up is the power of global distribution of distributors in countries that are starving for U.S. products. So it's not, especially if we're talking like consumer goods, for example. You do not, as a small company, have to worry about shipping individual products to individual customers within each country. There are distributors out there that you can drop off multiple pallets and they take care of the rest. Now, of course, you obviously lose a little bit of profit because you're not selling directly, but talk about getting, I mean, who doesn't want to just drop off 5 pallets at somebody's door and be like, here you go, have fun, write me a check?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That gets back to this notion you and I were describing about channel strategies. The word channel is used to describe anybody who resells your product for you anywhere, whether it's in the US or in a foreign country. And it comes down to that really careful vetting and research of finding the best partnerships. And I'm glad you raised the issue of compensation because you do, with every step of channel that you have compensation models that you have to meet to incentivize those in-country partners who will agree to take a container or two full of your products, put them in their warehouse, and through marketing agreements that the two of you can come up, together with, sell them and then reorder more, we hope. So, but then that brings up things like if you have a product that needs professional technical support or after sales service of some sort, that's kind of an incentive model for an independent company in that destination nation to make more money. So you can say, yes, yes, folks, here's this, product A with the margin that we'll agree upon. It's a physical product. We expect you to stock and resell and maintain. Or you can say, but it's the kind of product that has the ability for you to sell upgrades or to provide maintenance contracts. And that all translates to incentive funds that a channel partner might be interested in. It's an independent revenue flow for them. You might take a little less margin on that than you would on the product sale because the distributor is providing really good, valuable promotional professional
True.
services. So it's really important to think about the nuances of how you define your product and its different margins. Yeah, for sure.
Well, and that also goes back to what we were talking about earlier about planning ahead and making sure that you have a pricing structure that can be a part of. So when you're thinking about your pricing structure, think about whether you want to sell internationally and do you have room to be the same thing as if you have room in the US to sell to distributors. Do you have room to sell to international distributors? But, with the theme of you're not too small to drop off a couple of pallets to a distributor in a foreign country because that's as simple as that and figuring out a price and then everybody's happy and you're now a global company. So that's uh all very good things to think about. And I think you mentioned a couple of websites, you mentioned a couple of different resources. You'll pass that all to me and we could put that in the description of this podcast, right?
Absolutely.
That's awesome. I can't imagine a better resource for companies to have who are thinking about selling internationally. And Tom, you are a wealth of knowledge. And if anybody needs more guidance or has more questions about selling internationally, like we said, over 30 years of experience, you cannot talk to somebody better about potentially selling internationally. And Tom, thank you again for joining us. This has been an incredibly informative session. So thank you.
Oh, the pleasure's been all mine, Erica. Thanks for talking about a topic I know and love.
I was going to say, with such passion, it makes it easy to spend a 30-minute chat. And I'm sure this is one of those things that you could go on for eons talking about, but you helped boiled it down to the key points, and I'm sure our listeners are incredibly grateful.
My
Well,
pleasure.
thank you again for joining us on another episode of Building Up Your Business, the podcast. Remember, from bombs to order fulfillment, marketing to taxes, learn the stuff from the pros before you step in it. I'm Erica Dill, your host with Operationally Up. Remember, another episode comes out. I'm going to choke on oxygen here for a second. Apparently, I can't breathe. Another episode comes out in 2 weeks, so make sure to tune back in and see what our topic is then. But until then, have a wonderful, wonderful couple of weeks, and I hope to see you back here soon. Thanks. Have a great day.